Thank you everyone for attending the pre-tender briefing for open tender processes for the West Australian Community Resource Network services. Today we'll be covering the service information, an introduction and overview of the tender process, which will be provided by Department of Finance. We will be going through the draft service requirements, so what DRD is looking to buy through this tender from you. Then we'll be going through community services request and response form, and there'll be time at the end for a question and answer panel in case you have any additional questions you'd like to ask us. So our aims for today is to improve your understanding of the procurement process, provide an outline of the West Australian Community Resource Network services, and increase your understanding of what is involved to submit an offer. So hopefully by the end of today you'll have an understanding of what it is that we're after, what we want to purchase from you, and how to go about undertaking that tender. So just to give you a bit of a background idea of the Community Resource Network, I'm just going to go into a bit of history for those of you who may not have a background in our network. The Community Resource Network is a group of community hubs. They are made up of a number of locations and a lot of very dedicated people who work in that space. They provide community services, and they also provide community and government information. So CRCs have been operating since 1991, and they were formerly known as telecentres. They are a network supporting regional communities, and we currently have 106 community resource centres open and operating, mostly in towns of less than 3,000 people. So as I mentioned, the telecentre network is very much community minded, and that's how it started. And it started very much looking at providing computers and computer access to towns where most people didn't have computers in their home. They also were very much focused on providing internet access and training. And originally CRCs under the telecentre banner were closely involved with TAFEs in providing training to local communities. We also have our Westlink broadcasting service that CRCs provide access to as well, for those people who don't have the vast satellite network accessible through their home. So at the time that Royalties for Regions came out in 2009, the telecentre network then burgeoned into the Community Resource Network with a large injection of funding by the state government to broaden the capacity and the access of services to people in regional communities. And I think one of the things that's really important to note is that there has been a major increase in the number of locations, but also a major increase in the number of services that CRCs are able to offer their local community. So with the increase of funding, it meant that the telecentres were able to, under the banner of community resource centres, have updated computers. Broadband internet services were available. Enhanced services through the Westlink network, and there are a lot of some great programs that are being delivered through Westlink and promoted very strongly by our community resource centres. CRCs became very focused on being able to provide and assist in events for their local community. And increased in professionalism through strong branding of the network became available, and also increased professionalism through providing traineeships for CRC staff to provide a really strong brand and great customer service. Community Resource Network is encouraged to have partnerships both within their community and within the general CRC network. They have strong delivery of services, both through our contract and through other contracted services. And we encourage them to be really the place to go if you want information about your community. They are about being a community hub, and our contract is strongly involved with providing funding for the access of government information, but also the access of community information. So if you go and see a CRC, good chance that they'll be able to tell you exactly what you need to know and what's going on in your community. And that introduction of funding meant that there has been a large amount of capacity building, both involved with staffing of community resource centres, who originally under the old funding were mainly had small amount of paid employees and mainly volunteers. Now they're able to have a strong backbone of professional paid employees, and there's been a lot of funding that's gone into building and infrastructure funding. So with all of this, it means that the Community Resource Centre network is a strong network, and only made stronger by the partnerships that they've made and formed working together. And a lot of the CRCs are delivering strong outcomes for their own communities and others around them by forming partnerships between the CRCs, and we encourage CRCs to work in a collaborative, not a competitive environment. So the core principles that we're looking at for our community resource centres is that it's local decision making and flexibility in delivery with a strong underpin of governance. As you'll see, the West Australian Community Resource Network is very broad, and we have a footprint in every Regional Development Commission location. However, CRCs are not the McDonald's of the bush. No CRC is the same as the next, and nor do we want them to be. It is about delivering for your local community, and it is about identifying what is needed in your location in regards to services. So although we'll talk to you today about the types of things that we're looking at buying, it is about you identifying what specifically is needed in your location, not about a one-size-fits-all model. So what are we looking for? We're looking for an organisation that has a shop front to provide passive service delivery, where people can go in and get information. We're looking for an organisation that can deliver training and initiatives to the local community, has ties to the local community and strong stakeholder engagement. An organisation that has strong governance, because it's very important that we have a very good reputation, because what impacts on one CRC impacts on the whole network and the reputation of the network. And also an organisation that can work in partnership with the Department of Regional Development and the West Australian Community Resource Network as a whole. So that's what DRD is looking for from anyone who is looking to tender for our services. So I'll now pass you over to my colleague from Department of Finance, Heather O'Brien, and Heather will run through an overview of the tender process for us, and I'll come and have a chat with you some more around the types of services that DRD is looking at buying later on. Thank you.
For those of you who don't know me, my name's Heather O'Brien, so I'm with Department of Finance in Government Procurement. So I assist government agencies procure their community services, goods and services, and ICT. So my primary experience is in community services. So I'll be working with DRD throughout the whole tender process and keeping in line with government policy and assisting them to develop the tender documents themselves and evaluating them. There is some policies that sit behind every procurement process that we undertake in government. Most of you will be familiar with some of the policies, but I'll just run through them quickly. So the Delivering Community Services and Partnership Policy, also known as the DCSP policy, this came out in 2011. So it came out and replaced the former funding and purchasing policy for community services. So with Colin Barnett, he put together what we call a partnership forum. And the partnership forum consists of CEOs or senior people of not-for-profit organizations, as well as senior people in government. And they got together and they basically said, we want to work in partnership. So let's do this and create a policy around that. My team, my former team, I should say, the role was to implement this policy. So it's been about 5 years now since this policy has come out, and its main purpose is, again, to encourage partnership between the not-for-profit sector and government agencies. And the way we do this is through not only our procurement processes, such as different ways we procure, but also the way we engage the sector. So that's why DRD really want to focus on that stakeholder engagement and really assess the needs of the community in which that CRC is each serving. So it's really important to take that into consideration when we're developing your service models, and also collaborating with DRD to work together to not only put together a tender, but then going forward managing the contract so that the performance is meeting the needs on an ongoing basis. In terms of the State Supply Commission policies, I won't bore you too much by going into too much detail, but just know that DRD does have to follow certain policies that include fairness, accountability, and making sure that what they purchase is value for money. What does value for money mean? We'll go into that in a bit more detail, but it's basically assuring the public that what DRD is purchasing is going to achieve what it set out to achieve, and that at the end of the day, what they're getting for the money spent is value. An open and effective competition policy is really about certain levels or thresholds, we call them, in which the government has to abide by in terms of when you're purchasing over $250,000 worth of any community service. We say the default is to go open, what we call open tender. So that's the process that you'll be undertaking. And that just means that it's opening up to the market to see who could potentially provide this service in a fair and open, transparent process. So anything under that, there is other ways to purchase community services. Yes?
So the 250,000 that you mentioned, which is the threshold for default to go to competitive tender, open tender,
Yeah.
Is that for one contract? It's not the whole program?
So the $250,000 is the total contract value. So the total contract value means that if you have, let's say, a 3-year contract term, which is what is happening in DRD's case, then that would be the limit, which we would say is the total contract value. So obviously this is well and truly above that. Yeah. Okay, no worries. So we'll go over these policies in a little bit more detail in just a moment. So this is going to show you those values where I've mentioned anything over $250,000 is when we would go open tender. So there are exemptions from this, so such as the preferred service provider opportunity. There is other considerations, but there is a procedure in place that government has to go through in order to undertake that, and there has to be well and truly justification for that. So as you can see, between 50 and 250, there's written quotes. So usually that's 3 to 5 written quotes that, for example, a government agency would go out and get different quotes to see which is the best offer. Up to $50,000, a government agency can purchase without the involvement of Department of Finance. It's up to $250,000, but up to $50,000, it's up to the public authority or a government agency how they purchase. So the tender process. So as a whole, there's basically 3 stages to a tender process. So you're currently just before the tendering phase at the moment. So this is where basically a request document will get released on what we call Tenders WA, which is a website that you should be registered on. If not, it's not a big deal to sign up and register. Then once the request has been issued, you would then submit what we call an offer. So it's basically you've read the response, the request, and you're creating a response, what we call an offer. Then there's the evaluation phase. So after the request closes, DRD with Department of Finance will undergo what we call an evaluation process. So government evaluates your offer. And there is a process that we follow that's consistent through every tender process. So, there's obviously a lot of policies in place to guide government through this process to make sure that it's fair, accountable, and all those things that make it a fair and transparent process. Once the agency, or DRD in this case, has had a chance to evaluate your offer, then we go forward. If there's any negotiations or things to clarify, that would be identified and worked through. The contract award phase is next. So DRD in this case would either accept or reject your offer and let you know in writing.
Sorry, I don't mean to be difficult. I just need to clear something up. You said that any contract that's over 250,000 has to go to open tender.
That's in government what we say is recommended because at the end of the day we want to assess the market for who anyone potentially could deliver this service. So the tender process, when we go work with an agency, what we say is, okay, what are your services that you want to purchase? Who's in the market? Who could potentially deliver this? Where there is an exemption from that, there is a justification process that, basically an exemption form that is filled out by government to justify the decision to not go open tender. So it's a very scrutinized process that we go through in order to determine if we're going to not go open tender. What makes up what we call the service agreement? So service agreement is the same as contract. So we use that term interchangeably. So in community services, we usually say service agreement. So it's not just one document. So if you're thinking of a contract, it used to be in the old days that it used to be just a 4 corners document. So now there's actually more than that makes up what we call a service agreement. So it starts off with what we call our general provisions, and this sits under every contract as our general terms and conditions. And this can be found on the Department of Finance website. And we can give you a link to that after the presentation. So this is usually read along with the request document that is issued on Tenders WA. So as you can see, the request document takes precedence over the general provisions. So if there's something in the request document that is alternative to what's in the general provisions, that would take precedence. Then you submit your offer, and suppose that you disagree with something that's either in the request or general provisions, that would then take precedence if the department has agreed that that is agreeable. So there would be potentially negotiations that would happen for that to occur. The final thing is the award letter. So at the end of the day, if DRD accepts your offer, then you would get an award letter. And again, anything in the award letter that replaces something in the offer, request, or general provisions would take precedence. So that's why we organize it in that way. So those 4 documents, plus anything where you're negotiating and that's written in, that's documented in writing, is going to make up your service agreement. Does anybody have any questions about that one? All right. So there was a registration of interest published on Tenders WA on the 17th of October, and it closed on the 1st of November. And this just provided an overview of the draft outcomes, which Celia will take you through a bit later on. So overall, the request document is going to have in it the intended community and service level outcomes. So we'll get to the language around what is an outcome in a moment and what's the difference between a community level outcome and a service level outcome. It'll also have any essential requirements of the service, or what we call in government specifications. So what is it that DRD is looking to purchase specifically? And there is a little bit of flexibility, which Celia will cover off in terms of how your service looks, because we want it to be customized to the community that you're serving. So we don't want to just have a cookie cutter approach to every community that we're in. And it'll also have what we call a price schedule, or the information around the budget that's available for your particular region. And this will allow you to determine what is realistic or sustainable for me to deliver in terms of, I know I have this much money, so then what can I deliver for that? And the request will also have an outline of the evaluation process, which we've just covered. So here's some language around, in government we have a lot of jargon. So this is just going to give you a high-level overview of some of the language that you may come across when you're reading a request document. So the outcomes is the ultimate goal. At the end of the day, this is what we want to achieve. So when you're reading a request document and you see the term outcome, you're going to know that that's the ultimate goal. That's what we want to achieve. And so a community level outcome is usually a high level outcome. It's big picture vision statement, usually not achievable within the 3 years of the contract that's being proposed. But it's good to know, because we need to know where we're headed. The service level outcome is achievable within the 3 years of the contract. So it's really important to take note of what those service level outcomes are when you're reading the document, because at the end of the day, those are really what you're reporting against. So it's important to not only understand them, but understand what you're proposing and how that's going to achieve those outcomes. So in your offer, you're ultimately making a decision of how you're going to achieve those service level outcomes. And the way you do that is through your outputs. So your outputs are usually the activities. What are you going to do? What are you going to propose that is therefore going to meet your outcomes? So your services that you're proposing to deliver, or what we call a service model. And then the inputs is what you put into the service in order to achieve those activities. So sometimes we call inputs things like human resources. You may have a budget for rent, if you need to pay for rent to operate your community resource center. You may also invest in office materials, desks. So anything that is going to ultimately help you deliver those outputs or activities. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions about those terminology? Okay. So your offer really needs to clearly demonstrate exactly what the activities, or what we call outputs, are. So before you write your offer, it's a good idea to sit down and really do a big brainstorm with anybody who's involved in your community resource center and community, and really determine what are the key outputs, what are the key activities that we are going to deliver. And then also just have a discussion around how those activities or outputs are going to achieve the service level outcomes. So DRD usually uses what we call a theory of change model. And this is something that basically is program logic. So how do you get from A to B? So it's really just brainstorming, what are my activities, how am I going to get to the end result, and mapping all that out. And in your offer, you should also identify any potential risks with the service delivery and how you would potentially manage that. So at the end of the day, you can have your plan and you want to achieve your outcomes by doing the activities that you've outlined, but sometimes in the back of your mind, you know that there's potential risks involved with achieving those outcomes. So it's really good to map all of that out with your stakeholders in the community, the people that you work with, and just say, right, what could go wrong, and let's see how we might go about either preventing that from happening or, going another way. Explain the rationale and assumptions. So just don't make any assumptions that the Department of Regional Development understands anything about the way you operate as a business, even if you've previously delivered the service. So it's really important to put everything into the offer, because that's essentially what DRD will evaluate. So in an evaluation process, we say outside information cannot be taken into consideration in an evaluation process. It has to be about what's in the offer in front of us. So that's a really important piece of information. And also, if there is any sort of questions you have while, let's say, you're reading your offer before you submit it, and you go, oh yeah, they'll know that. Actually, just take a moment to put that little bit of detail in there so that there is no potential questions that could come up. Does anybody have any questions about that? All right. So in a nutshell, the evaluation process looks like the following. So DRD will nominate a panel, and the panel will consist of a minimum of 3 what we call voting members. So voting members have to be a government officer, and they usually almost always have the relevant knowledge, experience, and skill to understand A, what the services are, and B, how the evaluation process works. And sometimes what we have is technical expertise who, not so much in this case, but in the technical world, we engage a lot of consultants to bring in that technical knowledge for evaluating offers. I will also be on the panel to just bring that little bit of probity, accountability, making sure that it's following due process and making sure it's fair. So what happens then is, the offers come in, we meet what we call pre-evaluation meeting, and this is when the offers are handed out to everybody to read. So anybody who's on a panel will get a copy of all the offers. We individually read the offers, so we individually score and read the offers, and this has to be done before we meet in what we call a consensus meeting. So we come together for what we call a consensus meeting, where we discuss and come to a consensus. So it's not an average score, it's a consensus score. And we also gather our commentary, document all of our evidence to support the scores, and then we go away and we write what we call an evaluation report. And this is a very important step, because this is where we document all of our evidence for the scores that we give against the qualitative criteria. So the qualitative criteria is something that you will read in the document that you're given. So the request document has what we call qualitative criteria. And this is essentially what your offer is scored against. So when we go through the request later on today, I'll point out where those are and what to expect with the qualitative criteria. But it's essentially a benchmark for your offer. So when you're writing your offer, you'll know exactly what we're evaluating it against. So the evaluation panel will write the evaluation report. And this includes assessing, how much value for money does your offer have? So what is the quality and quantity of services that you're offering against the budget that will be disclosed in the document. And so we then have to issue this report to a committee. So the committee is called the Community Services Procurement Review Committee. It's a bit of a mouthful. We also call it CSPRC. So this committee meets on a weekly basis, and so we submit the report to them. I think it's on a Tuesday morning, and then we meet with them the following Thursday. And it's a bit of a daunting process for government officers, but it is a very important step as a check and balance for the work that we've just done. So they are more or less a check and balance. They do not endorse or, ultimately make the call of who gets the service or who is awarded the service, but they're there to check that we've done our job as government officers. And sometimes they don't endorse what we do, and they make us go back and tweak, clarify, etc., if necessary. So sometimes there's a little bit of a delay depending on how that goes, and we make amendments if necessary before the evaluation report is finalized. Once the evaluation report is finalized, this goes up to the accountable authority within Department of Regional Development. And ultimately, the accountable authority is the decision maker. They ultimately sign off on who gets awarded the contract.
Who sits on the Community Services Procurement Review Committee?
So there is about 7 senior government officers. So this is usually, high-level senior government officers who have many years' experience in procurement. They oversee a lot of processes in terms of understanding what's fair, what's transparent, what needs to be in the document in terms of justification for particular things. If they're seeing something that's not fair, if they're seeing something that's not transparent, they're going to go, what's this? So it's a really good group of people that have lots of experience in procurement. So the names of who's on there, or the titles of who's on there, are on the Department of Finance website. So that's something that we could send a link to if you're interested.
Okay. And just finally, if the review committee give it a tick,
Yeah.
it then goes to the accountable authority.
Yeah.
Does the accountable authority have the power to
Overrule
overthrow?
that?
Yeah.
Yes. So the accountable authority ultimately makes the decision. If they disagree with what the evaluation panel has recommended, which the committee has endorsed potentially, they could overrule that and say, no, I disagree. But it's unlikely the case, because what has happened before it's gotten to that point is that the evaluation panel has made a recommendation in the evaluation report. It has gone through a committee that's endorsed it, so it's highly unlikely to happen.
Okay, thanks, Heather.
You're welcome.
And is it possible to tell us who would be on the evaluation panel?
It's not something that we normally disclose, but it's definitely relevant key people who are involved in the process. I mean, I'm on the panel. Celia's on the panel. Oh, and you're not. Okay. Yeah, so it'll be senior people within DRD who've got relevant knowledge and experience procuring similar services, if not have procured these services in the past. And yeah, like I said, it has to be a government officer with relevant knowledge and experience.
And the accountable authority, is that normally the Director General, or?
It usually is. In this case, it is the Director General, yeah. Okay, no worries. So I've talked about value for money. This is a term that government like to throw around and say all the time and pretend we know what we're talking about. No. But it really means it's more than just the bottom line. Okay, so at the end of the day, we want to know, what are we getting for the money that's being spent? Is it quality? What's the quantity of services? Or, if you've committed to reporting on something, are you measuring something? Are you measuring the effectiveness of it? So the effectiveness is really important. So if something's not working, don't be afraid to come to DRD and say, hey, you know, I've seen that you've asked for this in the request, but I've consulted my community and I think that, you know, this is the way we want to go, and that, you know, all that justification, and then agreeing to how you're going to measure that. So, and that's really where the quality of the service comes into place. And it's about delivering those outcomes that have been set up for you in the request document, in consultation with the community, actually. So it's about achieving those outcomes, and it's also about your capacity to deliver the service. So if you're a well-governed organization, a well-oiled machine, achieving things efficiently and effectively, I gotta say that's value for money. So, and also managing those risks. So understanding what your risks are and how to manage them, and having the appropriate management tools in place. And yeah, even the wider benefits to your community and demonstrating that in your offer. So Celia is now going to take you through some of the draft service requirements that will be included in the request document.
Thank you, Heather. It's great having you here to explain all that Department of Finance stuff, because you're so good at it. Okay, so let's have a look at what DRD is wanting to purchase for this next contract. So Heather spoke about community level outcomes. And so community level outcomes are the overall outcomes of the service that the Department of Regional Development is looking for. But they are the outcomes that the department is also ultimately responsible for. So these are high-level strategic outcomes that we're looking at here. And these outcomes link to the royalties for regions legislation, which is where the funding it comes from. So for us to be funded through to the royalties for region program, it's important that these high-level outcomes can be related directly back to that legislation for Cabinet to approve our funding. So the community level outcomes for the contract from October 2017 through to June 30, 2020 is the development of vibrant and sustainable regional communities that have improved access to state government and community information that they need, regional communities improve their economic health, and regional communities improve their social cohesion and capacity. So in regards to measuring how community resource centres and the whole network meets these high-level outcomes, that is up to Department of Regional Development to report on. Where the responsibility lies for community resource centres is the service level outcomes. So the service level outcomes are the nuts and bolts of what we are looking to purchase, and as we go through we'll have a chat about what these would look like. So the community level outcomes for this contract is that community members are provided with access to state government and community information and services, which is very important. Local businesses and the workforce have access to activities and initiatives that improve skills and capacity to foster economic growth in the local community. And community members have access to activities and initiatives that create or improve community connectedness and capacity. So I think one of the really important things to look at here is the fact that we are looking at improving skills and capacity or improving connectedness. So it's not about just necessarily delivering activities, but how is that going to improve the livability for people living in your local community and in your region. And that's how it links back to the royalties for regions outcomes. So let's have a look at service level outcome 1. Community members are provided with access to government and community information and services. So with our tender response document, we have in it core services that we want every CRC to deliver. So we have a network, so it's very important that we're able to market that network as having some core specific things that if you go to a CRC, you know that you can receive this service. So there will be some things in the response document that will say that this is a core service, and you need to actually respond that yes, you're prepared to deliver that service for us to be interested in awarding your contract. So the core services for the service level outcome 1 is that you have a government access point. And a government access point is basically that someone can come into your community resource centre and that they're able to get information on state government services or information about legislation or rules and regulations that they need to abide by through state government. For example, it could be that they come in and they're interested in getting a fishing licence. So your staff can either show them where the computer is so they can look up the information themselves, or your staff can navigate to that part of the Department of Fisheries so that they can get a fishing licence. It's that sort of level of service that we're looking for. So community resource centres aren't required to have the same knowledge as government officers that would work in the Department of Fisheries, but just generalist knowledge to be able to help people to navigate and work their way through the minefield that government web services can be. The other aspect of the government access point is providing community information. So what's happening in your community? What people come and deliver services to your community that might be needed information. The other core service is video conferencing. So we provide you with a video conferencing platform, and we'll provide you with training for your staff on how to use the video conferencing platform. But about that connectedness, it really is about trying to make it easier for regional communities to be able to access services. So the types of things that people may use video conferencing for is it may be used by local community members to be able to link with a midwife at Nagala and get assistance with a problem child that's having difficulty sleeping, and can actually speak to that midwife face to face, even though they could be thousands of miles apart, and get that service that normally wouldn't be available in their town. The other core service is access to Westlink and the Westlink satellite broadcasting service. Now, we know that there are a lot of communities that actually receive all of their television through the vast satellite service, which means Westlink is streamed into their homes. So one of the aspects that we're really looking for is how does your community resource centre promote Westlink services to the community so that people know what sort of programs are available for them to either enjoy or to get information that could improve their life circumstances. There are additional services that you may wish to offer as part of this tender. And the additional services is either a hot office, which is where you have a dedicated office space that you will provide to a government officer free of charge to be able to meet with people or undertake work in your community. As we know, in some communities there is not a lot of available rental space, and they may be meeting with community members that don't have their own place of business to meet with. So that's an option that you may want to consider, and depending on your community and depending on what else is available, that may be something that you want to include in your offer. Alternatively, if you don't have the option of having an office that someone can ring up and book, you may have a space that is a place in an open office location. So open plan office and a hot desk. So that means someone could ring up and book, and they could come into your centre. They could sit there, make their phone calls, maybe do some printing if they need to do some printing, and in some locations have the benefit of some nice air conditioning rather than sitting out in a park somewhere in the heat, which is something that happens sometimes for visiting government people. Is between appointments and things, they have to sit somewhere and brush away the flies to get their work done. So having somewhere nice and cool and relaxing to do that work is something that we would be interested in buying. So are there any questions about service level outcome 1?
I was wondering how you were going to evaluate the use of the video conferencing. You mentioned how you're going to look at the government access point and Westlink, but just wondered.
With video conferencing, it is about having the accessibility and that you're promoting it, and also it would be expected that you would put most probably you may choose to put down a KPI of the number of people you expect to be using video conferencing. So that would help to determine the value that you would place against that particular item in your tender. So if you're in a location where you think that perhaps video conferencing might not be something that you have a lot of need for, you may not put down a high usage, but you would still need to include in the costs of having a room available for people to have privacy to undertake their video conference, and also have the equipment set up and the staff trained to assist anyone using the video conferencing services.
Celia, we've still got our Polycom unit that we keep in service with our ISDN line because the courts still use it. And we need it when people have to give evidence to a court a distance away. Can we include that if we wanted to, or does that not count?
If that's a service that you're providing to another government department, we would expect that government department is paying for the cost of that service. If you're finding that they're not paying for the full amount of that service, we would expect you to have a discussion with them around why they're not paying that full amount for that service.
I don't have a budget.
You could consider placing that into your offer, and we would consider that. Let's get into the fun ones. So, service level outcome 2, local businesses and the workforce have access to activities and initiatives that improve skills and capacity to foster economic growth in the local community. So this is a little bit different from our current contract for CRCs that are currently working with DRD, in that we have included the workforce as part of this service level outcome for the new contract. So based on feedback that we've received from the network, some locations we're finding that working with the local business, either the services that were not required by local business, or they had very few local businesses to link with. So they did identify, however, that they do a lot with either underemployed or unemployed people within their community. So as well as being interested in training and workshops that are aimed at businesses, we're also looking at training and workshops that may assist people who are looking at improving their skills so that they are more employable by local businesses. So the core service that we have for service level outcome 2 is referral relationships. Now what this is not, what this is a list of organisations, which may be businesses, maybe not-for-profit, maybe government departments, that as you're working with the community, you may find a need to refer people to these organisations. And it's about that list being up to date and relevant for your community. So the types of referral relationships that we find that community resource centres have within their list is local Chamber of Commerce. It might be the local small business centre provider. It may be Wageline to provide information to employers about the correct pay rates to apply. So those are the sorts of things that we're looking for, that your staff have access to a list of either providers that provide to your community or that visit your community that could either assist local businesses or assist people trying to enter the workforce. Now, the additional services, so with service level outcome 2, the core services, we do want you to have a list of people that are relevant for your community, and then we want you to pick at least one service type from the additional services list. And by pick at least one service type, we would expect more than just a hot office or a hot desk. We would expect, based on the value of the value of the contract, that you were delivering something either in item 3, 4 or 5. And I will explain those three areas that we're looking at purchasing. So training and workshops, business development focus, are activities where you're providing training with specific outcomes that you expect people to achieve from that training. So you expect them to have learning outcomes at the end of the training session that they go away with. So an example of that would be perhaps if you are running a course on accounting software to assist local businesses. Courses that a lot of community resource centres find work very well are AgriMaster courses in the wheat belt, where people are paying a fee to attend them, and we're more than happy for you to be charging for people to attend these courses. But the cost to the participant is much lower than if they had to go to a regional centre to access these courses, and also it reduces the time that they're away from their business, because they're not having to undertake travel as well. Information sessions with a business development focus is about more of your sort of like business networking type event, where you might have a group of business people come together for a breakfast, and you may have someone come and provide a talk for 20 or 30 minutes. So it might be someone from an accounting firm come and have a chat to them about how they could improve their accounting software. It may be someone to come and have a chat to them from maybe WorkSafe, might come and have a chat to them. So depending on what it is, but there's no very specific learning outcomes from it. It's just a generalist discussion, and we see that as a lower level of event that you would be planning. Number 5 is local initiatives or projects with an economic development focus. So the type of thing that we're looking there is where you may be involved in a project to improve the economic health of your community. And the types of things there could be a shop local program that you're working in partnership with local businesses to deliver, to encourage local community to shop local. You may do a Christmas market where you are encouraging people who have at-home businesses to put up stalls, and again getting people to shop locally and creating a local atmosphere. Or it could be that you employ a school-based trainee or employ a work for the dole person. So there are a few different aspects that we're looking at there that could fit in with your community needs, and also that fit in with your organisational capacity. Are there any questions about service level outcome 2?
With the work for the dole, do you mean employ or engage? Because work for the dole is a separate program?
Engage.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So our third and final service level outcome that we would like you to include in your tender is community members have access to activities and initiatives that create or improve community connectedness and capacity. And I really would like to emphasise the second half of that sentence. It is really about you being able to demonstrate the outcome that it is improving or creating community connectedness or improving the capacity of the individuals involved in the program. So again, the core service is a fairly small part, which is your referral relationships. And this is referral relationships where you've got a list of people that you can refer to people in the community that are more of a social development aspect. So it might be health services, it might be counsellors that you can refer people to. It may be, for example, the Nagala, referring them to Nagala if they're having issues with newborn babies, that type of thing. So you could also include on your referral relationships other organisations, not-for-profit organisations working that are in your community. So for new people coming to the town who come to the Community Resource Centre, they may be someone who's really interested in arts. So you can refer them to the local arts group, or you could possibly refer them to the CWA or the Men's Shed. So it's those sorts of things that we're looking at where you're helping to create a community environment and making people feel welcome and provide them with the information that they may need that may not be easily accessible or readily available in a regional area. On the additional services that we're looking at buying is community training and workshops, information sessions with a community development focus, local initiatives or projects, community development focus, or association support, executive officer assistance and training. And again, we are looking at least one service type from the additional services list is included in your tender. So depending on the makeup of your community may depend on what it is that you're interested in putting into that tender offer. So for example, community training and workshops may be something that you're very interested in delivering. It might be that you have a lot of interest by your community in being involved in activities that are going to improve and enhance their community connectedness in such a way that they are getting training also. You may be more interested in doing information sessions. So an information session may be where perhaps you have a podiatrist come along and talk to the seniors about foot health and improving circulation. So it might be just a little morning tea. You have a podiatrist come along and has a talk to people for about half an hour and shows a few slides of nice feet, not so nice feet, and that's the type of thing that you're doing. But it might be more around a full day training. So we might be looking at a full day training where you may have people come along and they may be learning computer skills that they wouldn't normally have. And it might be Skype for seniors, where you're sitting down, you've got a group of seniors and teaching them how to Skype. You're teaching them how to set up the Skype app on their iPad so that they can Skype their grandkids. So that's the type of thing that we're looking at in that space. Local initiatives projects, community development focus, that may be community events that you may be involved in. So this is something that we haven't previously had in our contracts, but we know that community resource centres are involved in a lot of large events that occur in their community. So this is an opportunity for you to include a large event that you may already be involved in your community. So the sorts of things I'm thinking of is the Blues and Roots Festival, for example, down at Bridgetown. It may be that the Bridgetown CRC provides administrative help, marketing, that type of thing for that event. You know, that's the sort of thing that we're looking at. Okay, now the last one is association support, and we've got a lot of feedback from the network that one of the big areas that small towns are struggling with is keeping and maintaining strong committees, volunteer committees, for a lot of their sport and rec services and organisations, and also, you know, things like your CWA, Men's Shed, things of that nature. So this is an opportunity for the CRC to be able to provide specific support to those organisations. And it is about developing the capacity of those organisations. So I'm not suggesting that you go along every month or every 2 months to their meeting and do their minutes for them, but it's about providing templates and training to new officers within the association, maybe helping them out with their AGM, that type of thing, just to make it easier for people to put their hand up and feel confident to be involved and to volunteer in their community. Is there any questions about service level outcome 3, or does anyone have any questions about the type of services that we'd be comfortable purchasing in that area? Yes, Jane.
Where would the Women's Health and Family Service workshops fall? Would that come under, or the gala workshops that they run through the video conferencings, would that fall under?
Absolutely,
the service level?
absolutely, yes. So anything to do with health and wellness would definitely fall under this community area. And I think the important thing to note is with this contract, we're not stating that you need to apply, you know, an equal budget across each of those service level outcomes. So it may be that you're in a community that's got really strong community and social development activities already happening. You could have a youth services. You could have a strong seniors services. If you're located in a migrant area, you could have strong migrant services provided. But you may have very low business services, and it may be that assistance to farmers and local businesses may be where you want to put more of your budget because you want to deliver more services in that space. Or alternatively, you may find that there's low need for business services, so you want to deliver a lower level of service in that service level outcome too, and you want to focus more on community development area because that's where there is the need and you've identified the need in that space. So there is an opportunity for you to tailor the offer to what your local community requires. And of course in the offer there will be a section where you are stating what you see as the local community needs and what you see as the local community future needs. And so we'll be able to then look at your information that you've provided in that space and then also marry that up with what you're offering us. Did you have a question, Julie?
Yeah, we've got a really strong business association in town that is doing really good work, and there's no need for us to do business-focused events. We can partner with the business association, and we do, and the business association has got a presence on our management committee. But as far as doing lots and lots of business-focused projects, there's not really a need. More, we just are there to support the business association when they need us. So that's one area where we can take a back seat, if you like. Is that something we could look at, where you're looking at tailoring projects? We could do more community-based focused projects and less business-focused projects?
Absolutely, Julie, that's exactly right. So if you've identified that there is a strong business network presence in your town and you're working with them in that space, it may be that in service level outcome 2 you may focus more on what you do deliver in that space is for the underemployed and the unemployed, but that may be the space that you want to go into, or you may want to just look at what you do in partnership with the local business network and then put more of your budget into the community development space, the service level outcome 3, absolutely.
Thank you.
Just reiterating, the core services will be required under the contract. So in the response document it will actually say this is a core service. Are you prepared to deliver it, yes or no? If you want the contract then you'll say yes, because otherwise we can't award it. And then you have, and as it states here, core services relate to more passive service delivery, where the community and visitors can access state government and community information and those referral services that we have under service level outcome 2 and 3. And our additional services are your more active participatory services. And there's a lot of flexibility and scope to find something that should be tailored to both what your organisation is able to deliver and also what your community needs. So what I'd like to do now is just provide you with an example of a business training service that DRD may purchase, just to give you a bit of a feel for the type of thing that we're looking for. Now this is only an example, but it just provides you with perhaps a bit of detail and the type of information that we need that will help assist us to be able to evaluate your offer. In this example, the Community Resource Centre that is offering this service is going to do one-on-one training sessions. So as we know, in a lot of locations, it's not always easy to get people in to be able to do group sessions. And that might be because of the demographics of the town. There may not be enough people. It might be because of people's work commitments. Or it might be because people are just not really comfortable in being in a big group training situation and they prefer to work in a one-on-one. So we're quite happy with either one-on-one or group training. The sessions are tailored to the individual needs of clients based on a needs survey completed by them prior to the session. These sessions will be delivered by the manager, assistant manager, bookkeeper and casual support officer. Based on the current expertise of our team, the CRC anticipates offering training focused on the following areas, with the possibility of this evolving as new skill sets become available through staff development and/or recruitment. IT-focused support, so social media marketing, e-news creation, website development, basic to advanced Word and Excel, bookkeeping basics, time management and project planning. So that's the sort of example that you may put into your offer if you were looking at providing training under Service Level Outcome 2. And in this instance, it is tailored and identified for existing businesses. That's what this is for. So to help a business set up its Facebook page, for a business to set up an e-news newsletter and that type of thing, to help them to set up their books if they're a new business, and also perhaps help them with some project planning, that type of thing. So in this instance, the Community Resource Centre hasn't had to buy in any expertise or consultants to run the training, and so the costs that you would charge the participants would reflect that, but we would still expect there to be a cost involved. Okay, so we're not expecting you to deliver services free of charge. We expect you to be looking at making sure that your organisation is sustainable, and so therefore you need to be looking at what income sources that you can get. And that'll also help you to identify really what are the needs of the community, because if people aren't willing to pay a fee, especially in a business environment, then chances are what you're offering may not be what they need, and you may need to go back to your community and ask them a little bit more about what sort of things they want delivered in the community, that they need to have that training and they don't want to go and have to travel to do it. So again, some of the sort of courses that we know have been very popular and have also assisted in CRCs in gaining an income stream through both their contract and through the participants is the ChemCert training for farming. So that's another area that CRCs have found very good. Forklift training is another one that has been very popular. So the sort of service mix that we are looking for so this is for Service Level Outcome 3, so the sort of thing that you might have as an example of the mix that you're offering us is that you would have the referral service, which is the core service. You might have training and workshops for the community. So you may be offering You may have one or two specific things that you know work really well in your community that you want to deliver, or you may have a gamut of different things that you want to do. So it's really identifying what the need is. So it may be that a lot of areas in your community have been covered, but young mums might not be. So it may be that you really focus on those young mums because that's what's needed. Local initiatives, you may have one event a year that you're involved with, and the CRC staff provide quite a lot of assistance, both through volunteering in that event and also to the lead up to the event. The CRC may be a core deliverer in that. So you may have one large event that you do. For example, a lot of community resource centres do the local Christmas tree at the end of the year and organise for Santa, and they organise for a local barbecue for the town, that type of thing. Or like I said, it could be something really big, like being involved in a large, very large, well-known festival that gets lots of visitors into the town, such as Blues and Roots. Information sessions, you may decide that you do a few information sessions throughout the year, and they also may be linked to other grants that you receive, such as the Senior Weeks grants that come through. So you may do some activities such as Keep on Your Feet, which you may get some senior grant money for that as well. And also you look at how that works in with your contract for us. And you may decide that for the association support, what you're going to offer is you're going to have maybe a checklist for new committee members, like something general, and maybe some templates, examples of how to take minutes, how to keep your agenda, maybe some information to help a treasurer. That might be the sort of thing that you include, or it might be actual training and having people come in and you sit down with them and provide them with some face-to-face training. So that's the sort of service mix example. It may be that you don't pick that number. You may, for example, be looking at the referral service, want to do training and workshops, and may choose not to do the other three. It's as long as you're able to, in your tender, be able to provide us with value for money. So we'd be looking at how many of these things you're offering and what is the quality and the depth of what you're offering. So with the Community Resource Centre, each location has been assessed and allocated a fixed budget for the delivery of services to that location. Service providers, such as yourselves, will be asked to allocate the budget across the service mix areas they have identified as best for the community needs. So as I've mentioned, Department of Regional Development will not be saying to you, you need to put 30% of your budget against service level outcome 1, 30% of your budget against outcome 2, and the balance against outcome 3. You need to look at what it is that you're looking at delivering and identify what the costs would be for you to deliver that, and then allocate the budget across there. So unlike a lot of goods and services tenders where government may say to you, we want 50 widgets, and we're telling you exactly what the volume is that we want, and we tell you that the widgets need to be of this quality, and then we ask you to provide us with a tender offer, and you advise us how much money that would cost us for those 50 widgets. In this instance, what we're saying to you is that we have a fixed amount of money for your location, and for that fixed amount of money, you're to tell us what you're able to achieve so that your service would be sustainable, and you're taking into account your costs, all your on costs. Okay? Is there any questions about the budget?
If we've got a project that we can combine, so we've got something, say work for the Dole project, we can combine. We can say, well, we're going to run this work for the Dole project, and it's going to be a joint project with DRD. So we've got it with Max Employment and DRD combined project. We can include that?
Yes, absolutely, Julie. We're very interested in people leveraging and looking at other funding sources. So it might be where you have other income coming in, or it may be where you can access other grant funding. So, as I mentioned, the Seniors Week example, where you may get a Seniors Week grant, but you know that the admin and time and everything takes to actually put that grant in, you might not be able to get the full funding to cover that, and that's where you would still have that activity down as something you're delivering for DRD, because part of the funding for it is for DRD, and part of the funding comes from seniors.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Do we know what the fixed budget is?
The fixed budget will be provided when it goes up on Tenders WA. So when the response document goes up, each location will have the amount that's allocated to that location. Yep.
And when's it going up on Tenders WA?
It will be going up on Tenders WA on the 20th of December, and it will be up for Merry Christmas, everybody. But it will be available for 9 weeks on Tenders WA. So you'll have 9 weeks in which to formulate and do the work to do the tender.
Sorry, so that actually equates to 7 weeks with the closures over Christmas?
Depends on your organisation, but it will be the 21st of February that it will close.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So are there any questions about the service mix or service level outcomes? Yes?
So 21 will be the close of the tender. When do you expect to have it announced? How long will you guys take it? 2-3 months or something like that? Or
Around about, yes. Having a think about it, I think we're looking at May as our timing to have it undertaken. So we have a 93 to assess and evaluate. So we're looking at May as the date. Are we looking at early May?
I wouldn't say early. I would just say May.
Okay. All right. We won't.
May 2017.
May 2017. Yes.
Got an indication of what you won't buy?
What we won't buy? We will have a guide. We'll have a guide to services that will give you an indication of what we're looking at purchasing. So that will give you the information about the types of services we're looking at. I think one of the things that we are looking at is, if you have a look at the wording of each of the service level outcomes, if you can provide us with a clear indication of how it meets those requirements, then that's fine. And during the life of the contract, it is a negotiated process. So, if you put something up and then we can negotiate. If for example you say, we're going to do a bingo night, and we go, okay, I really like going to a bingo night, that sounds great, but how can we relate that back to those higher level outcomes that we need to do? It might be that you say, well, in your community you've got a lot of people living out on farms. They don't get a lot of time during the week and during the daytime to get together. The bingo night is focused on getting people together off of farms, and it creates community connectedness. At the time that you're going to do the bingo night, you're also going to do some fundraising and sponsorship for Beyond Blue, and raise awareness and have Beyond Blue information up around the room at the same time. So there's a big difference between saying to us we're going to do a bingo night and providing that context of how it is going to engage the community and create a better community capacity. Yep.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Okay, thank you.
Just one question.
Yes.
In outcome 1 you spoke of government officers. Can you define that, please?
A government officer. A government officer. Well, we're looking at usually state government officers. So we're looking at people whose email address finishes with .wa.gov.au.
What about contracted agencies?
To a large degree, we allow CRCs to be fairly flexible in that space, but the idea is that it is for government agencies per se. And certainly where CRCs have got long-term rental agreements with contractors, we don't want the free government to be used to be impacting on other income that you may have coming into your CRC.
Yeah, I understand that, but just the government officer is a bit blurred now because there's so many sections of the government that are actually contracted out.
Yes, and that's why we allow it to be flexible. So we leave it to the hands of the CRC to determine if they feel comfortable that the person is delivering a direct government service for state government.
Because it's an open tender process, how much flexibility is there for somebody who's responding to the tender or wanting to put in a tender to send in, for example, a draft with their ideas to get some feedback so that they can do that before they put in their final tender? Because you say it's a negotiated process.
It's a negotiated process once the contract is awarded. As it is an open and competitive market, DRD would not be able to be involved once the tender opens in providing any advice regarding someone's actual documentation. So we can provide generic advice. So if someone rang me up and was asking me generic advice, I'd be able to provide that definitely, but I wouldn't be able to look at their document and make recommendations or suggestions, because then the equity value of the open competition is compromised. Yes, Heather?
So if there is a question raised that's more generic and that would be applicable or useful to let the other respondents know, then that would mean that there would be an addendum issued. So that would be published on Tenders WA and be fair for everybody to understand what the question was and what the answer was.
Yes, so as Heather mentioned, for example, if someone rang up and asked for some clarity in regards to our documentation, because there might be some unsurety, we could then provide that information to everyone. But you couldn't send through your draft offer and ask DRD to comment on it prior to the closure of the tender response. Yep.
We're going to continue this afternoon's presentation just going through a community services request template. So this is also available on the Department of Finance website under Government Procurement and then Community Services Templates. So if you would like, I'm sure we will send you a copy of the template. If not, we'll refer you to the website after the presentation today. But a version of this customized for the services that DRD is purchasing will be issued on Tenders WA. So the document that will be issued will not be this exact document. This is what we start with. So this is just to get you a little bit familiar with what that document looks like, so that when you see it and download that on Tenders WA, it's not the first time you've seen that document in terms of what that looks like and what the response form looks like. So I've given you a copy on your tables. I apologize, it is 2 pages per page. So it is a bit fine print, but it's more or less just for you to follow along when I'm going through the document. Okay, so follow along if you will. So part A is the first section of the document that we'll go through. So that's just on the other side of that first page. So page 4. So part A is, what are the services to be purchased? So this is where you will read the document about the background of the services, which Celia has provided context. And some of you are very familiar with the background and what the service is, we would hope. So therefore, you've got the service requirements as well. So that's where the outcomes are stated. So at the high level, you've got your community level outcome. And as Celia mentioned, that's not something that is a responsibility of the community resource centres to achieve by the end of the 3 years. That's ultimately going to be measured by DRD and achieved by DRD. But what you will be responsible for achieving by the end of the 3 years is those service level outcomes. So in the document, it's 1.2.2 there. So that's where DRD will put their service level outcomes. And as Celia has gone through, there's 3 service level outcomes for this particular service. Under 1.2.3 is the statement of requirements. So this is where it will go into detail about those core services versus additional services. So there will likely be a chart that organizes that for you under each service level outcome, so you can see the overall big picture about what's expected. There will also be some more detail under what's expected under each of those core services, especially where there's some flexibility is around what you're choosing to offer in terms of those additional services. So those may be more vague in terms of leaving it open to the potential service providers to provide what's exactly going to be delivered. But essentially, what is expected of you will be detailed in this document in this section. So it's very clear about what's expected. So going over the page, so now I'm just on the page 6 there. Part B. So this is really about, where can you get more information as what we call a respondent. So when you're responding to a tender, we call you a respondent. So it's really about details of a briefing. Now, this is a pre-tender briefing that you're having today. So this is prior to the issuing of a request. DRD, I believe, is not intending to do a tender briefing. So once the request is issued, it is my belief that there's not going to be a further briefing after this presentation. And that's really because today we've provided you with a lot of the information that we would provide you in a tender briefing. So this material will be available after today to be accessed. So you can refer back to it if you need to. The other details there are who the contact people are. So there will be someone at DRD that you can contact if you have questions, which is likely Celia. And there will also be myself for any procurement-related questions. And if you have any trouble uploading things on Tenders WA, we'll also provide you a number that you can call for any technical issues that you may have. Going over the page. Going on to Part C. So how will the procurement process work? So we've kind of already covered this off in the earlier part of the presentation today, but here it is again in writing for you if you would like to understand what happens. It explains the purpose of the request document. So it also explains that in conjunction or alongside the request document, you will also need to read the general terms and conditions of contract. So that there is what we call process terms and conditions. So that's just, again, reiterating that that forms a part of the service agreement. And the framework, as I mentioned in my earlier part of the presentation, so there's more than just this one document and your offer that make up the service agreement. There's the general provisions, the request, your offer, and the award letter, and anything that happens in between that's going to be documented in writing. Moving along to Part D. So it goes into the details of how you will lodge your offer. So I think the preference is electronic offers, and that's through Tenders WA website. There will be a closing date at the front of the request document clearly stated, so a time and date of when you are required to submit your offer by. So the lodgement details will be really clear about how you need to lodge your offer. and the date and time will be on the front of the document. So the closing time is essential to follow, so late lodgements will not be considered. I mean, there has been issues in the past where there's technical glitches with Tenders WA. In such cases, we'll deal with those one-on-one, and if necessary, we'll go down the pathways that we need to sort that out. So your offer will be valid for a period of time after you submit it, and that's just to ensure that throughout the duration of our evaluation process, your offer still stands at the end of the day before it's awarded. So you'll be able to read that in the document. Usually, depending on the length of a process, it can be anywhere from 6 to 12 months validity. So, we're saying that hopefully we'll wrap things up by May. So the validity of your offer needs to be at least until maybe May or June, just to allow for that time. But it also needs to allow for the transition from the current service expiring and then the new one issuing. So we'll make sure that basically your offer stands until it's going to commence. All right. So Part E. So we covered this off again just before, but again, it's in writing for you to refer to. So how will your offer be assessed? So this is the evaluation process that we discussed. So the policies that we follow are listed there. So it clearly states, the delivering community services and partnership policy, value for money, probity and accountability, and also open and effective competition. The evaluation criteria is something that we'll see a little bit later on in the response form, but here initially it just explains what is the evaluation criteria. So it's basically what your offers are assessed against. So DRD determine what those are prior to issuing this request, so that you know what's expected of you in terms of how you will be evaluated. So there is such thing as mandatory requirements. In this case, we're not going to have mandatory requirements, but if you did, for example, have that, you would need to meet that mandatory requirement prior to be further assessed. Qualitative criteria obviously will be listed later on, which we'll cover off. There's also a part of the document where you'll need to disclose a yes or no, so answering yes or no to questions, and we'll get to that in a little bit. It also considers the price that you offer. In this case, it's a fixed budget. So really it's just about, agreeing to that budget, and then it's determining what can you offer for that money. But that's essentially how we are assessing your offers. We're taking into consideration all of those things. Yes, question?
Yeah, just a quick one. With the fixed budget, is that anticipating any inflation over time, or?
So what happens is after the first year of the contract, so the first year is fixed budget. The second and third year will be indexed. So similar to what we call CPI, indexation will be applied in years 2 and 3. Yeah, so a slight increment in years 2 and 3. So Part F. So this is the key service agreement details. This is really important to read and understand. So it even says respondents are to read and keep this part. So this is forming a part of that contract. So it's really important that if you read this and potentially, want to propose something alternative, you know exactly what you want to propose alternative to that particular clause. But yeah, so it's more for reading and understanding, really. For example, it lists the term of the agreement. So in this case, it'll be 3 years. And the initial term and extension options will be, in this case, grouped together for the open tender process. So I believe because we're extending the current service by 3 months, The total term for the new service agreement is going to be 2 years and 9 months. So the service agreement commencement date will be listed there. Any extension options, which again are not applicable for this case, but that's just where that's all laid out. Any payment schedule. Flipping over the page on 13 and 14, so it continues on, so the clauses go on to detail. So as this is a template, you may or may not see all of these clauses included in what you are seeing on Tenders WA. So DRD uses this as a start point for when we're developing a request document, and it uses what it needs to when it forms the tender document. So flipping over again to page 15 and 16. So it goes on to finish off those terms and conditions. It also covers off things like insurances. So what are your insurance requirements? Put any police clearances that are necessary, intellectual property. So make sure you have a good read and understand what's expected of you as a service provider. Going on to Part G, so on page 17. This is really just a guide. So when my team had a relook at this template and we were, deciding what we should change, we decided it was a good idea to put in a little bit of a guide to responding to this tender form. So this is really just to read and consider before you start your response form. So it's just saying, make sure the offer, or your offer in this case, addresses your respondent details. So making sure you've got your correct legal entity name, your ABN, all that detail. If there's any mandatory requirements, obviously not in this case. Disclosure requirements, so making sure you've gone through all the disclosure requirements, answering them yes or no, and disclosing what's alternative if you say no. Understanding the qualitative criteria and, in this case, the budget. So you can read and consider that before responding to the tender. So this is the most important part. This is the part that you need to write all your details in terms of what you're proposing to offer Department of Regional Development. So this is Part H, the response form. So this will be something that you will be downloading and typing into, making sure your respondent details are there. So that just goes through, who are you, what's your business information, making sure that's the right, correct update information. And just below on page 18, it's covering off business details. So that's just really for reporting purposes for Department of Finance, curiosity's sake. Are you a small business? Are you, for example, an Australian disability enterprise or Aboriginal business? So these are initiatives that Department of Finance drives, and we like to know who's who in terms of who's contracting with government. So purely it's just for our curiosity's sake. Going over to page 19. So continuing to fill in your respondent details, we'll also ask you which location you are proposing an offer for. So that will just obviously tell us which location you're making an offer for. Quite simple. The mandatory requirements there, 7.2, is not going to be applicable for you in this particular tender. 7.3 goes into the disclosure requirements. So this is understanding what insurances are expected of you to have. And also flipping over onto page 21, you will just need to fill out your insurer's details. So what's your policy number? When does it expire? So this is just important for a DRD to understand, so that if it's expiring, for example, if the service is due to commence 1st of October and your insurances expire 31st of October, then that will just be a conversation saying, have you renewed your insurance policy so that when you're awarded the contract, you're ready to go. That's really all we really care about, is that you're insured. Going into contractual compliance. So this is really about yes or no, you do or do not have that particular question that we've proposed. So things like criminal convictions, not necessarily excluding you from going forward as a respondent, but it's something that you need to disclose and comply with in terms of disclosing that information. Conflicts of interest, again, it's just to manage those. So it's not going to prevent you from getting a particular chance to be considered. It's, again, just important to disclose that. 7.3.5 is about subcontracting. A lot of the community resource centres don't subcontract, but you know, if you wanted to work with someone, that's where you would disclose that. Professional standards, referee details. So I believe you will at some point need to provide a referee, so have a think about who you may like to potentially give as a referee. So all those things, financial viability, yeah, those are yes or no's. Going over to 7.4, qualitative criteria. So this is where you'll need to really understand what DRD is assessing your offer against. So flipping over onto page 25, these are your stock standard qualitative criteria. This is not to say these exact ones will be used for DRD, but I would suggest that something similar can be expected. So usually we assess against your service methodology, which is really what are you proposing to do? What's your service model? So out of those core services and additional services, obviously you're committed to delivering the core services, but what additional services are you offering? And not only that, but how are you going to offer those core and additional services? So some part of our assessment in the evaluation panel will be what are you offering and how does that meet the service outcomes? And these are just, and this is just a sample in terms of the wording that you'll see in the request document. A part of that is also assessing the measurements. How are you going to measure the success of your service? So you may need to propose some targets, some key performance indicators, what we call KPIs, but you will be guided in forms of like a chart, examples, so that you'll have a guide to how you can offer that or present that in your offer. Other qualitative criteria that you may see are things like your skills and experience in delivering similar services, if not these services. So really trying to summarize what is your skill and experience in delivering this service in the past, or who do you have on your team with the relevant skills and experience. Tell us a bit about them and their backgrounds. And also the organizational capacity. So this is around your governance structures, your boards, your committees, your policies and procedures, anything that helps you run your business well. So we'll evaluate your capacity to run as an organization in order to successfully deliver the service. Does anybody have any questions around the qualitative criteria examples? So those are just some examples of what you might see. Then we're moving on to price schedule. So here is where you'll have a detailed budget listed there. So you'll have the location and the exact budget that you'll be offered to for the term of the service. And you'll also get an opportunity to break down how you're spending the budget across the programs that you're offering. So this is where it's really important to understand the costs to deliver these services. And so start to think or brainstorm with the relevant people in order to assist you in understanding that before the tender is released. You have any questions?
Do you want us to work out how we're going to work out before the tender's released, but we don't have anything to work with unless we know if it's going to be very similar to what we're working with now?
So I guess my comment to that is understand what it costs now, and once the tender is released, you'll have a much better opportunity to know what it is that you want to propose based on what you know it costs already. And if you're going to change what you're currently doing, then you know what the difference is.
Okay, so using what we're working with now is a really good guide. Is that what you're saying?
For sure. I mean, it's a starting point, and I think understanding what you're doing now and the cost of that is only going to help you in terms of understanding what's changing going forward, and then knowing the difference of costs.
Thanks.
You're welcome. All right, so page 26. So that's just really responding to the price schedule. And there will more or less be a chart to fill out that will just basically itemize or have a line item for how you break down that budget. And Appendix 1 will not be relevant to the request that we issue, so that will not be there. And that's essentially the request. So this is a template, as I said, and DRD will use this as a starting point, or already have used it as a starting point when developing the request document before it's released on Tenders WA. Does anybody have any questions about the template? Okay. So I'll just give you some tips for not only, I guess, producing your offer, but when you're submitting it. So there is potentially sub-criteria. So, I've talked about qualitative criteria. So what is DRD going to use to assess your offer against? Under each qualitative criteria, there will be dot points, or what we call sub-criteria. So it's really important to address those. So address every dot point or every line that DRD have asked you to respond to. And again, make no assumptions that they know anything about your business, even if you are currently providing that service. Because we're assessing what's in the offer, not what we already know, because that wouldn't be fair, would it? So even using dot points to address those sub-criteria are a good idea. Making sure you're registered on Tenders WA so that you can get updates. Once you do download the document, or what we call the specification, so the request, you will get updates about anything that's issued in terms of an addendum or communication. So it's just more or less about making sure your details on Tenders WA are up to date. So making sure the relevant person has their email address and contact number on Tenders WA. Making sure you submit it on time, obviously, so giving yourself enough time, and David will cover off some of that project management, timing, planning before you submit your offer. So I guess, don't make any assumptions that DRD knows anything about your business. And, government's guilty of this, but using jargon and acronyms. So just spelling it out in the first instance so we know exactly what you're saying. Tenders WA. So you should all be familiar with Tenders WA, but if you're not, you can just go to that website, and it's really easy to register, and I think DRD have even offered to assist in terms of making sure you're registered and understand how to get registered. So once you've been registered, there is even search filters that you can set up to make sure that you get access to not only this particular tender, but other potential opportunities to work and engage with government. So I'll hand it over to David now, but I will be available after for any questions about the template. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. My name is David Murithi, just in case I hadn't introduced myself before. And Celia and Heather have completely covered most of what you need to know. So for me, it's just a reminder on the mission ahead, should you choose to accept it. Yeah. So I guess to be practical, these are the questions you want to ask within any project you undertake. And by all means, formulate yourselves in this task as if it were a project. So the first one is, what tasks need to be done? By all means, it's the tender and your submission. Give us one document if you can. Submit back one document. You will have attachments. If you do, keep them minimum. Things like brochures, that's fine to attach. And there will be availability within the tenders WA to submit up to, I think it's 2 megabytes or 2 gig. I think it's a huge amount of space that you can actually put onto tenders WA. The financials and the pricing schedule, that will be part of your submission as the one document. Skills in computer, touch typing, copying and pasting, that kind of stuff. That's the practical stuff on what you actually want to put together. The who, questions to ask there is the personnel that are involved with the day-to-day management of the organization need to be part of actually putting together the submission. Some of those personnel you want to find out within that 9-week period. What's the availability like? Do you have leave planned? What does that look like? Maybe have a backup plan of if somebody's on leave, who else can actually work towards your submission. Are you choosing to engage a consultant? You may want to think about doing that a little earlier as well, because come that 9-week and Christmas period time, services do dip and people start going on leave. So early engagement is important. The how tasks is gonna be completed. The key theme here that we are constantly referring to is engaging with your stakeholders, your referees. Call them up, ask them whether they're able to provide a referral. Think about some of your past engagements with your local community and even the future ones. Start jotting them down on a book that you will actually use eventually to put together your submission, just the practicality bit of it. Your thoughts about what you want to achieve with your community engagement, identifying your future local needs. Start talking to the community. What are some of those things that you may already know and maybe you want to start putting on paper? Start collating your material. I mean, it may take 1 or 2 pages, but it's important to actually have it together. Your risk management, probably dig it up. It's probably dusty, collecting dust somewhere. Bring it out, have a review of it. You may need a review and see what that can be put into your response. Your pricing schedule, start thinking about your costs, your daily costs. Just look them up, start putting notes down, and you'll eventually come up with a number which you can start working with, a more practical number. The when, for me, I guess it's important if you can plan and schedule dates to work on. And this can be as simple as saying in your mind, 2 days a week, 3 to 4 hours a day, and actually make it work. If it's something you can set as a reminder with our phones, or even tell 1 or 2 or 3 people who can hold you to account as well. How's that tender going? keeps it in the back of your mind that you actually can work on it. And you've got 9 weeks, and that's pretty much it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your attention and your time today. Before we wrap up, I know that we've been answering questions as we've gone through, but are there any questions that people have now that you've listened to all the content?
Is this going to be an even level playing field now for everybody? You know, like there used to be levels 1, 2, 3 and ABC and all of this. Are all CRCs going to be the same?
Well, basically you'll be putting together your offer, and your offer will state what you're going to deliver based on the budget that's been allocated for your location. So it's
CRC gets a different budget.
So every CRC will be looked at individually.
Yeah.
So what you can deliver for your budget will be looked at individually.
So it's not like each CRC's got a separate level anymore. It's just each CRC's got a different budget these days.
That's correct. Yeah.
So they're all different.
The amount of budget per location is different. So yes, each location has its own budget.
So it's fairer per individual CRC as opposed to being lumping CRCs into groups.
There is no grouping anymore.
That's finished now, so
Yes.
each CRC is looked upon as an individual CRC.
That's correct, yeah. Each location is looked down individually, yeah.
Right. So a lot more thought's gone into each individual CRC as that. Right.
So have you based that on historic workflow and inquiries and all that sort of stuff?
So basically it's been based on demographics, and then
Not the
this.
last census.
No, we haven't got that yet. So demographics and a number of models were presented, and the accountable authority chose which model that he believed was appropriate to go forward with. Yep.
Did we get a quantum leap funding?
No, there's no quantum leap in funding. No, that funding was allocated through the cabinet, and so we do have the funding has been determined to be out to June 30, 2020. So we've got that guarantee of funding out to then, and most probably in 2018, DRD will start canvassing and putting forward a submission to government for further funding for the network. Yes. But at this stage, the reason why the contracts end on June 30, 2020 is because there's no funding that has been approved outside of that, and royalties for regions funding can only be approved for a 4-year period. So that's where we got approval for the last year, which was sitting in forward estimates of this current contract, and then for the out to 30 June 2020 is the furthest out that Cabinet could provide us, and they did that, which is, we're very grateful for.
But CRCs aren't going to be expecting any nasty surprises. They're not suddenly going to turn around and find that they've had a 50% drop in their contract funding, are they?
I can't tell you what your funding will be it'll be up on the tender, but the Cabinet submission is an equivalent value to what CRCs have been funded in the past, so that should sort of answer your question. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome.
And if iron ore goes up, it could be better in the state.
Fingers crossed.
Interesting.
Okay, thank you.